Ukraine's reaction to the historic NATO summit has not been one of support, but we're going to break down just why NATO is operating the way it is, and if Ukraine is targeting Russian logistics even deeper behind the front lines. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's July 11th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get right into it. Okay. First, let's take a look at the combat map. There's no updates to the control map from yesterday, but I wanted to point out, first off, you see Russian forces, again, really trying to run this offensive in and around the Avdiivka, especially south of it. They haven't enjoyed a ton of success, but what I think is most interesting, again, is that, one, Russian forces still believe they have the combat power to run these deliberate offensive operations, and more significantly, that Russia is continuing to try ineffectively to sort of launch, again, a very Russian-style offensive, right? Attacks across this broad swath of lines. Again, you just don't see the sort of lightning advances, the breakthrough attempts that you would think that they would want, or even just simply systematically clawing out gain after gain, yard by yard, right? You can see here near Krasnohorivka, they are attempting to liberate parts of the city. Conquer parts of the city. But they literally haven't been successful. Ukraine appears to have been more successful liberating Krasnohorivka, despite it being ground zero for Russia's ostensible offensive. You can also see they're trying to launch counterattacks in Bakhmut, and Ukrainian forces actually have reported, according to ISW, that they claim to have fire control of Bakhmut because they control some of these heights around the city, which I'm moderately skeptical of, since this is not an area where you can necessarily allocate tons of indirect fire batteries, simply because, again, they're in range of Russian batteries and Russian combat power. But you can see Ukraine, again, trying to create this big bow outside the Burkiva Reservoir that is enjoying some, at least, level of progress and success as they push northeast towards Yadhine. I think this is, again, part of the goal of encircling Bakhmut, trapping Russian forces within it. But the execution, again, at this pace, it's hard to encircle forces when the pace of progress is so incredibly glacial. When we look at Warmapper, they're actually reporting that Ukrainian forces are making advances near Robotyne. You can see where, if you look carefully, you can see that there are Russian fortifications that Ukraine has at least broken through, right? A very systematic fortification line right here in Robotyne, and much lighter fortifications in this area, though obviously buildings themselves can easily be used as fortifications. Let's actually take a look real quick at the combat map. I just want to see the Russian fortification situation in Robotyne. We can sort of tease out just to what extent Ukrainian forces have made or have not made progress. Okay, here we go. Here's Robotyne. And when we deploy the fortification map, you can see that there are certainly some here, but there's a number of unreported fortifications. So this is sort of a little sketchy, I'd say, a little different than what Warmapper is reporting. You can see here Warmapper showing a much more consistent combat line, especially to the east of Robotyne, which this depicts there being almost no line of fortifications at all. But we're still talking about a considerable distance from the dedicated Russian combat lines in the south. So we're still a long way from achieving anything resembling the big breakthroughs that Ukrainian forces really need to enact. I mean, you can see that the entire region here is just crisscrossed with entrenched Russian positions. Probably, at least these major ones, are in all likelihood very, very prepared defensive positions that will be very challenging to break open. Okay, let's talk real quick before we get into the situation of the politics of NATO, I wanted a quick shout out combatvetnews.com. You guys know YouTube routinely cracking down on my content, demonetizing it. Sponsors really don't want to touch this war content anymore. But I still believe that this is absolutely essential, right? Your tax dollars are going to support Ukraine. And so someone needs to provide this level of analysis so you guys understand what it is that's happening in an honest and straightforward way, right? I call out all the things Russia does that are morally wrong and tactically wrong. And you know what? I do the same for Ukraine because this is part of being an honest analyst. So if you support what I do, the best way to do it is combatvetnews.com. Any one of these tiers gets you access to an exclusive room on the Discord, as well as members-only content. The members-only content is my analysis of the viral combat videos of the week, and we break down all sorts of stuff. We looked at how Ukrainian forces last week were using their Bradleys, their tanks, in order to clear Russian defensive positions. You can see them getting a little bit better, a little bit more deliberate, and a little bit more effective at countering Russian defensive efforts. So if you're interested, again, combatvetnews.com. Link should have appeared up here. It's also in the description and the pinned comment. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this NATO summit. This week, or rather yesterday, the NATO summit occurred in Vilnius, Lithuania. And Vilnius is, NATO basically went out here and discussed sort of a number of questions facing NATO. These sort of meetings are routine, but again, they sometimes get various levels of leaders to attend. But this year, definitely, you had UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak here. You had, of course, Joe Biden himself. You had a real number. There's Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And so you see that these are extremely high-level officials, right? Which usually is indicative of just how essential this conference is viewed by all the NATO participants. And these countries are, this is probably for a lot of these countries, the number one priority right now is the Ukraine conflict, support for Ukraine, the unity of NATO, and NATO's way forward. Now, Zelensky, of course, acknowledging that in a tweet, right? They value their allies, value shared security. Ukraine is represented at Vilnius, but right, he was hurt that certain things are being discussed about Ukraine without Ukraine present at the table. While I understand his concerns, they're not a NATO member, and NATO members, part of the organization, is discussing things behind closed doors within members. And certainly almost every conversation was likely around something about Ukraine. Right. There's also, of course, the ongoing issue of the invitation to become a NATO member. And he is upset that there is no time frame for either the invitation nor for Ukraine's membership. There's simply vague wording about conditions. And he's arguing that this level of uncertainty projects weakness and indecision to Russia. Why is NATO behaving this way? Well, to do that, you got to understand the constraints of the open door policy and Article 5. Now, part of the issue with Article 5 is the right of NATO countries to defend themselves from aggression. And this is something that any country in NATO can trigger. From the smallest country can ask for Article 5 assistance from the United States, right? The largest military in the world. And per NATO treaty, if Russian forces were to roll tanks through Vilnius, it would be treated as exactly the same as Russian tanks rolling through the streets of DC. And so the response from these NATO countries, it's a serious trigger. Asking for Article 5 assistance is a huge deal. And the issue is when a country has an ongoing conflict and does not control its sovereign territory, then if you were to bring them into NATO, you would give them the authority to call on all NATO militaries for assistance. And if they are actively engaged in a war, then it would be absurd, preposterous to think that country wouldn't call on its NATO allies the day after signing membership. And so that's why NATO is aware that they're like, we cannot give Ukraine Article 5. And Article 5 is the linchpin of NATO membership. So you can't have NATO membership without Article 5 is just a bunch of feel-good collaboration agreements. About, absent Article 5, NATO is about attending meetings and making sure that you all call a brigade the same thing, right? It's important. Those functions are still important, but they are not Article 5. So you have the issue of Article 5. You also have the issue, though, of NATO's open door policy that holds that any country with an interest in the North Atlantic can appeal for membership. That's how you end up with countries like Turkey as members. Again, you have this issue where Ukraine has to always have the door open to it. In fact, in the 90s, Russia was considered likely to become a NATO member, or at least highly possible. And NATO said, yeah, if Russia wants to meet conditions, they can become a member, right? It doesn't require NATO, while many of the countries are democracies or have varying, a Western style of freedoms, freedom of speech, right to choose your leaders through elections, that sort of thing. Not all of them. Turkey is moderately free, a little, but certainly under an autocratic leader at the time. So there's no hard and fast rule about NATO membership, about who can join and who can't. But the catch is NATO is stuck in this between a rock and a hard place right now, where they say, okay, Ukraine has a right to join, but Ukraine cannot simply be brought into the fold because it would immediately embroil NATO in an existential conflict. And they can't be brought into NATO membership with an asterisk that says, but the most important part of NATO membership isn't available to you, Article 5. So that's why NATO is stuck in this situation where they say, we're trying our best. We can offer you post-war conditions, but even that, it's tough to say, right? What will post-war mean for Ukraine? Will it mean a continued occupation of Crimea or the Donbass? Will it mean even larger Russian occupation, right? Will it mean that the fighting will move to Russian sovereign territory in the form of border disputes? Would those border disputes cause an Article 5 trigger? It's tough to say. All this on top of the fact that as a NATO member, Ukraine's military would be very well trained and combat experienced, but it would still be very, very different in many ways and would somewhat be dependent on NATO aid. So I say all this to point out that when we see these sort of statements, and sometimes the media wants to spin things as mean old NATO doesn't like Ukraine or whatever narrative you're trying to spin, that these are very smart people, teams of people. We say this isn't like Joe Biden sitting alone in an office being like, how should we navigate this? There are countless incredibly intelligent staffers from all of these countries who negotiate for a year before these sort of events take place, deciding how NATO is going to word its arrangements and offers and statements, and what exactly sort of agreements are going to be announced and discussed at these sort of summits. I say that because no one's a mustache twirling villain in these actions. NATO is doing what's best to protect those countries from war, right? Because a direct shooting war between NATO and Russia is not something that anyone wants. Russia doesn't want it. NATO countries don't want it. The only person who sort of wants it is Ukraine because they're already in the direct shooting war. But even Ukraine may realize that, if Russia faced with the full might of NATO's military, Russia may choose even more extreme options that even Ukraine would agree are not something that we want to see. So, and Zelensky is doing what any good leader would do, which is appealing to the public to try to shift public opinion on NATO's decision making, which in an organization made up of mostly democracies, shifting public opinion can really have a change. This is one of the reasons that simply talking about the Ukraine conflict in an English language channel like mine is considered a pro-Ukrainian move, because to Ukrainians, just making the public aware of this conflict and not letting them forget it is itself just incredibly, incredibly important. So I hope you guys get some insight there from just how decisions like this are made, what the thinking is of each country, and how they're trying to play chess. Even though they are all allies, even allies are constantly playing chess and jockeying for position against one another. Welcome to international politics. I'm your guide. Anyway, thanks so much, guys, for joining me. As always, thank you tremendously to our Colonel tier members. You guys really are the ones who make this whole thing possible. And thank you to our Lieutenant tier members. Again, appreciate you guys so much. And I will see all you guys in the next one.